I mean, and we're good. And there you go. So we are recording. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Sustainiacs. I am Michael Vincent, the Sustainiac. Every time we do this, my Sustainiac this week, the other one is Max Winograd, right? VP Digital Solutions at Avery Dennison. Did I get that right, Max?
You did, Michael.
All right, cool, man. And this is
Awesome.
really cool stuff. I was excited to run across what you do. Actually, David hit me up and said, "Hey, dude, you got to talk to this guy," and he's absolutely right. I was really excited about it too because I grew up driving down Route 90 every day in Mentor, Ohio, seeing Avery Dennison. I know exactly where the campus is. I've seen it a million times. I think back then we were all convinced it was just like Post-it notes or something like that was the thing that it did. Just adhesives or something like that was back in the day. But hey, welcome to the show, brother. Just quick, who are you and what does Avery Dennison do and why should we be talking to you, man?
Sounds good, Michael. So thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be the Sustainiac this week. So as you said, I'm the Vice President of Digital Solutions at Avery Dennison. And usually, to your point earlier, when you were driving down Route 90 several years ago, you probably didn't think that Digital Solutions and Avery Dennison would hang in the same sentence.
No, not at all. I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm like, okay, well, when I was seeing it back in the day, wasn't anything such thing as digital.
Well, so here we are. So Avery Dennison, if you go back to our origin, we were founded by Stan Avery, entrepreneur in the loft of a flower mart in Pasadena, California. He invented what's known as the self-adhesive label. So if you think about the name tag that you peel and stick on your shirt, to the label on your wine bottle, to the label on your Amazon box you get at your front door, like that label material, that pressure sensitive adhesive is sort of the underlying technology that started our journey at Avery Dennison. And if you think about what a label does, it identifies things, right? It identifies the shipment, identifies the product, identifies the person if it's a name tag, right? And we've, as a business, continued to grow kind of our identification solutions to then include things like intelligent labels with RFID, QR codes, Bluetooth sensors. And we've been pioneering this whole progressive family of these essentially data carriers that now go on to physical products to then bring with the physical good all of this information that then can live not just on the product itself, but also in the cloud or in the digital world. And just a few years ago, we started building out our digital solutions to then really enable this complete sort of bridge to exist. So when you think about Avery Dennison, you historically think of materials, but we're a material science and digital identification solutions company. And we're doing that because we've got this knowledge of these industries that require, packaging and labeling, but then also we understand what supply chains look like and the types of data that gets generated and then is of value to all the different stakeholders. And so we bring all that together in our new capabilities and our existing capabilities to kind of lead at that intersection of physical and digital.
Yeah, no, so it totally makes sense, right? Because I'm looking at what you're doing here in the digital and reading the RFID and stuff like that. And now it completely makes sense when you think about the absolute origins of the company. This is just a natural progression of exactly what the company was originally started and was doing, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. And much like that, you were a political science grad from Brown. And I know Brown's a good school, but how does one do that? And then all of a sudden, you come out and say, you know what? Hey, polymer science.
Well, I mean, they were like next to each other in the dictionary, so maybe I just got it wrong when I started as a freshman, and then I got it right afterwards. I don't know. No, just kidding. No, so my journey to Avery Dennison, maybe, Michael. So I in my final year of undergrad, I met up with what became my technical co-founding team for my first startup, and it was called New Label Technologies, and we were essentially trying to take these really cool concepts of activatable polymers that my technical co-founder, Ben, who was the CTO of the company, was developing for biopharmaceuticals. So think about like drug delivery with activatable polymers on the drugs and stuff like that. And we said, let's take that technology and let's bring it to packaging. Because if you think about essentially coatings, adhesives, or some types of polymers that can turn on when you want them to, you can create a ton of efficiency, reduce waste, reduce costs, reduce operational complexity, and potentially create new ways to engage with consumers because you're now stretching the limits of what the chemistry and the packaging can do. And we built this business, started it right after we graduated. We built it over 8 years. We raised venture capital, strategic investment, and ultimately sold the business to Altana, which is a large German coatings and ink company. Um, I, as an entrepreneur, was sort of thinking, okay, what's next for Max? And like, what's the next project? What's the next startup? And I was not thinking, like, I'm going to go work for this large German company. And so I was, shortly after we sold the business and we closed the deal, I got approached by Avery Dennison, and they offered me a unique opportunity to create a corporate venture capital program where the company was going to use its balance sheet to go out and invest in startups and
Oh
invest in
yeah.
entrepreneurs. And it's a huge movement that's been happening over the last decade in corporate America, where you're seeing a ton of these CVCs, corporate venture capital funds, pop up. And Avery Dennison saw a unique opportunity to do that, to sort of start bringing in outside innovation and really going out into the ecosystem. It's one of our core values of external focus. We go out to get better. And so I jumped at the opportunity to do that. And then from there, I was starting my journey at Avery Dennison. This goes back about 6 years, in October of 2017. And halfway through that journey, I got approached on this digital opportunity. They said, the teams were looking at, how do we accelerate what we're doing in connecting physical and digital worlds? Because we have this fundamental belief that in the future, like, every physical item is going to have a unique digital identity and digital life. And by being that sort of leader at the intersection of physical and digital, we're uniquely positioned as Avery Dennison to really help brands, consumers, the whole value chain unlock the power of that digital identity of that connected product. And using our sort of venture capital lens, we went out and we said, okay, well, what's out there in terms of technologies we can partner with and work with to help bring this forward? Then we quickly realized that no one really quite had it right in terms of the ability to do the work of capturing this data throughout the supply chain, managing all this data, because we're talking about like trillions of things that get made every year, from your ketchup bottle to your T-shirt to a soccer ball to a smartphone, like trillions of things.
Max, I mean, you're making a great point there, that the trillions of, because there's trillions of items, just categories of items.
Yeah.
But then there's trillions of each one of those items. So it's not, you're not identifying just coffee mug. It's every single coffee mug.
Yeah, as well.
Right?
As
I mean, that's what you're talking about. Every single item will have a digital. Every single pencil in my
exactly. So
every
it's not just like
crayon
the
in my
shirt.
64 pack. Yeah,
yeah. It's
really,
not just the black polo shirt. It's every polo shirt, and it's that polo shirt because
exactly. Well, I mean, and that is really, because. Okay, so I was one of the I helped found the BITA, Blockchain and Transportation Alliance, right? And so this sounds like the kind of like the technology that needed to be in place for really blockchain to really take off, right? Because I've always argued that, okay, blockchain's great, but until you stop having, Mike Vincent put the data in, all you have is, immutable crap data potentially, right? Because if the human's putting the data in, it's probably going to be wrong at some point. Right? And this kind of solves that issue.
It's a huge challenge. Well, there's a huge challenge there. I mean, think about things like if you think about it from a sustainability lens, like tracking Scope 3 emissions.
Absolutely.
It's a huge undertaking. I mean, it's 80% of all emissions are Scope 3. So those indirect emissions in your up and downstream of your supply chain. And the data. I mean,
that's a philosophical question that we could go round and round and round and round, because third part, Scope 3 is actually somebody's Scope 1, right? So 80% of Scope 3 is kind of like, okay, but it's really Scope 1.
Well, it is, but then you've got to weave together then everyone's Scope 1 and everyone's Scope 2 to then get to what Scope 3 actually looks like.
Exactly.
And that also involves consumers and end of life. So
I'm not arguing with you. I just think it's an interesting circle that you start getting into, right? Because I argue that with people all the time. Your Scope 1 is somebody's Scope 3. So Scope 3 doesn't mean that it's less important than Scope 1. It's just as important, right?
Yeah, well, companies are going to have to soon be reporting on this. I mean, there's the groups now that are looking at, whether it's the SEC in the U.S. or the International Sustainability Standards Board, are looking at ways to make it so that this becomes sort of just like we have financial accounting as a discipline, where it's not an exact science, but it is something that ultimately we rely on, that powers our capital markets and how we value companies and how we invest in companies and how we value everything in our global economy. We're going to have a similar lens through sustainability, and Scope 3, Scope 1, Scope 2 are all going to be part of that in the future.
Yeah, no doubt at all. It's so, all right. So we're gonna unpack. There's so much there that we can go and unpack and get crazy with. I mean, it will be you're going to have to come back for like 5 or 6 different episodes. And by the time we cover this one subject, you'll be on to something else. But what exactly are you doing there? And what is Atma.io? And I mean, and as you corrected me, the dot is actually silent, right? So it's
Exactly.
Atma.io. So, okay, what are you doing there digitally? Or do you just like speak in really intelligent words and sentences and nobody's really sure? And you're in this office and people go, it's digital, it's Atma. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. Let's start with the first one, which is, what does Atma mean?
Yeah.
So Atma is a Sanskrit word for soul, Soul. And if we think about a product and that unique digital identity I was talking about a few minutes ago, I think that's the product's soul. It's the true self. It's like the one thing that doesn't change as the product goes through the supply chain, as it gets packed, unpacked, it gets made into something else. Like the soul just persists. If you recycle it and give it a second life, the soul persists. If it's in maybe a different form, it goes from being a Coca-Cola bottle to then being another thing made with those plastic materials, right? And so the idea, though, is that you kind of create the soul of the product at its birth, manage the soul and all the data that gets attached to it through its life cycle, and then back around again and back around again. And so with that just philosophy in mind, Atma.io is a connected product cloud. So that is essentially a data platform to create, manage, and assign those unique identities, those souls, to products, individual items, and then manage all of the data and the metadata that gets generated as that product moves to the supply chain. So every time a product gets scanned, it generates another data point that will then tell us more about the product.
It seems like you need more dimensions in your database than just 3 to make this happen. I mean, I remember when the concept, like DBase4, whatever, the concept of 3-dimensional databases started, right? That's where it seems like like 6 or 7 to be able to do this type of thing, right?
Well, I mean, it is, at the end of the day, going back to the point about it's like trillions upon trillions of products, and you think about each product itself generates dozens of data points. I mean, you very quickly get into these huge numbers of just the amounts of data that we have.
Okay,
and that's the challenge, because
but it's not
who's
just
going to sift through all this? Who's going to look through all this data?
About there. This pick now, this guitar pick is in my possession, right? But Atma.io would know where it came from, right? And every point in its history to get right here, right? And but also all of the materials are there because there's printing on this, right? Which is probably not a singular. They probably didn't extract this, and put, what I'm saying? They had to produce that ink. So there's all the materials that are in that ink and the producers and the vendors and everything that went into this ink, but also the polymers and plastics to make this. But then, okay, after my useful life experience with it, are we tracking that too?
We could.
Yeah. See, and that's amazing, because that starts to lead us into, the difficulty of circular supply chains and circular economies, and what will be the new mines of raw material, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
As Deborah Dahl puts it, the previously detached from the earth materials need to become our new mines, right? Because the old ones are running out. Is that where we're going with this?
Absolutely. I mean, let's take like the fashion apparel industry. So like fashion apparel textile industry accounts for like 10% of all global emissions.
Yeah.
And during like this podcast, it's going to be something like 11,000 tons of textile waste will be generated just while we're talking.
Wow.
Like, crazy numbers. But 1% is recycled.
Yeah.
1%.
Well, when you say recycle, can you define that recycle? Because a lot of times when you peel back those layers of recycle, it doesn't mean exactly what people think it means.
And that's a whole other point as well. Yeah, and then so another lens of that is then when you have your waste, or you're finished with the first life of the product, it either gets recycled either into essentially back into what its original form, or it gets downgraded into something that's of lesser material, lesser value. It could get just incinerated or destroyed because it does not have any useful life, or it's deemed not to. or it can be recommercialized. Like it gets cleaned up, refurbished, whatever, and then it gets resold.
Yeah.
From our knowledge and our work in the ecosystem, it's in the single digits, like 4% or less of products that get recovered are in a condition to be able to be resold.
Oh,
And so we're not even talking about
I would
recycling.
imagine
Yeah.
that they are. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, we have kids and stuff like that. And so we go to these consignment sales and sell their old clothes and stuff like that. And it's so many items of textiles, your clothing, et cetera, that we sell inside those. I mean, they're brand new, especially for like young kids. Young kids are like fast fashion. They wear it for a month, it's gone. Right.
Yeah. And it's not, and I do see that trend ending. This is Max talking, and I'm not a wizard.
Okay.
I'm a political science major, so I don't know a lot. But I see that if you look at, to your point, your kids like Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like the younger generations that are moving into more of the kind of consumption power
Yeah.
of consumers, like we're seeing greater demands for durability as a key attribute of a product.
Sure.
And so we actually did some research, some primary research. So we just went out to thousands of consumers in various parts of the world and asked, like, what are the key elements when you're considering a product? And the number one thing was durability. And so I think that's actually speaking to it. At some point, we're going to crest this wave of fast fashion, which is leading to just so much copious consumption and overproduction. Because they're not sure the demands and all those things. Like we're going to need to see an evolution there because it's not a sustainable approach. And I think everyone knows it. It's then just how do we get to the point where we can actually act? And that's where, from an Avery Dennison perspective, we see some of the things like digital product passport being essential to help enable things to be identified, to know how to care for something, how to give it a second life. We think programs like what Adidas and others are doing to help enable re-commerce are really essential. And that ultimately requires things like the physical digital trigger that goes on a product, like a QR code or an RFID tag, and a data platform to manage all that information to know this product was made with these materials. To take care of it, I got to do this. And that's really where like our solutions come together and where we see, I think, the most opportunity to help actually move the needle on waste reduction, emissions reduction, and just enabling this model to shift to a more circular one in the future.
And so if we dive into that a little bit, because it makes perfect sense, but the hurdles are enormous and impact almost everybody on the planet when you start talking about circularity, right? Because we have been having such, whether it's intentional or not, and it was intentional in the beginning, but designed obsolescence is been used for so long that it's not even a diabolical or nefarious thing, right? It's just the way you do business.
Mm-hmm.
So, but our all society is this linear: extract it, use it, throw it away, right? And that's it. All our efficiencies, all our supply chains, and all our whole financial system, when you build it up in society, is built on that. So changing it isn't quite as easy as just saying, well, here, just turn this bottle back into another bottle, right? I mean, you're killing off a huge section of the economy and society in many locations that are already underserved, right? I mean, so how do we get to that point to convince, and how, and more importantly, how do you get companies to actually make money now that their shirt is going to last 5 years instead of a season? You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying? We got all these
it's a
things.
really great
I'm not
question.
pretending like you might have the answer. I'm just saying these are questions, right? That we've got to answer. Very,
No,
very.
I mean, if it were easy, it would have already happened, right? Like that's
Sure.
right. If we could have done this without a lot of investment, without a lot of, alignment, without a lot of stakeholder management, all those things, like we would have done this, but we haven't yet because we collectively are always in that challenge of kind of continuing to deliver growth and the expectations of growth while then continue to deliver value and continuing to meet longer term commitments. And I think what we're starting to see is a shift in folks that see that we can create value in different ways. And so if you think about that question you're asking about, okay, I have a more durable thing that's going to last longer. So how do I then make money? I mean, the example I was sharing earlier with Adidas, their Infinite Play program, the way it works is you register your product through their mobile app. It will actually then give you an offer to trade it in, and you get a voucher for that product. And what that does is a couple things. It builds brand loyalty because I, as the consumer, am getting rewarded by the brand for doing a sustainable thing. The brand is building loyalty because this voucher is going to bring you back and will enable you to then spend additional money on something new and maybe something refurbished. And it ultimately is extending the life, so it's going to reduce their need for overproduction, additional waste in the supply chain, and ultimately carbon footprint. And so I think if you look at it from that lens, like the value models will shift to being more subscription based, or finding ways to build loyalty and other ways to remunerate consumers to continue to build that identity between the brand and the consumer, and the product becomes more of an enabler than it is just a thing that you buy, use, get rid of.
Yeah. And so, and I get that. So what that leads me to think in my mind is that, and I've discussed this many times with many different people, and I'm sure you're familiar with the idea that to get that true circularity in your product, when you're designing that product from its birth, right? You need to be thinking about how is it going to be used at end of life. That has to be in the product, right? So even an Adidas shoe, the idea isn't that in 2 years you're going to trade this in for another shoe and they're going to do something with this shoe, like maybe, ship it off to a third world country or something like that. Cause that's what happens now, right? I mean, I've been in the poorer countries of South America and seen the, Golden Gophers of Minnesota national championship T-shirts that never happened. You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Cleveland Browns Super Bowl champions. You can find those because they never. But is tearing it down, right? Kind of that being able to overcoming the laws of like entropy, or and just it either level cycling it or upcycling it. Downcycling it eventually produces the waste anyway. So we need to keep things at the even level at least as much as possible, right? So you're talking about that
totally
type
agree.
of information as well, right?
Yeah, what we're looking at is things like moving to monomaterials or moving to materials that are easily separated, so they can be recycled in their individual streams, and then they maintain that level of quality that then they can go into an upcycled product or something like that. It's a huge effort. And then there's also a need to continue to monitor those products as they're going through maybe recirculation and stuff like that. So if I think about like consumer packaged goods products, most places outside of the U.S., you're using things like reusable containers for Coca-Cola bottles and stuff like that, right? And so how do you monitor to make sure it's gone through the loop enough times that it's generated the value of circularity, but you're not leaving it in there for so long that then it breaks or that then contaminates recycling?
Yeah, I was going to say that. You could, because if you, so Eric Lidke started Unless Collective, and it's amazing that you brought up Adidas because he was there and helped start the whole, and one of the reasons that he's like, okay, I'm going to go do my own thing is because of they couldn't figure out that model of taking a first run virgin PET bottle or PET water bottle and converting it into, fibers for, a shirt or whatever it is, because then it's done. When it should be recycled a number of times before it then gets made into a shirt, right? And that's what you're talking about.
Yep.
That is very cool. Yeah, to be able to do those cycles. Awesome. I love it. So one of the things that's in here, and I'm breaking down kind of the points of Atma and sustainability and what it hits, right? And item level traceability, and we can just run through these. And a lot of this we've already hit, but I mean, go through. So how detailed does it get if we take a shoe, for example, right? Because there's thousands of different items that go into that shoe. Does it take all those, and how does a company utilize that or engage with Atma?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So if I think about, let's take the sneaker example, there's essentially like a couple different stakeholders I'm thinking about if I'm going into a supply chain. I'm thinking about the brand, and the brand is going to want to know what raw materials went into that product and where they came from, whether it's because there's regulations around forced labor, or there's regulations about like the requirements of organic being certified and things like that. All of those sort of attributes upstream need to get collected. The typical way of doing it is you go one up and one down. So I go to my tier one supplier and I say, hey, can you guarantee that what you're selling me is whatever, organic, kosher, whatever it might be? And then they'll say, yeah, I can do it because I went up to my tier two and I asked them the question. But no one's going all the way back holistically to the supply chain to truly make sure that when you go all the way to the cotton farm, that we're
Mm,
actually getting
yeah.
the cotton from the correct region, that it's from those types of things. And that's the question that ultimately brands are going to have to be able to ask or answer, because whether it's Customs and Border Patrol enforcing it, whether it's regulations in the EU requiring an understanding of where product materials came from, there's going to be just a baseline regulatory requirement for this. But that isn't the reason to do it. The reason to do it is because you can actually make money doing this. And you can make money doing it on a couple different levels. By knowing what's going into your products and knowing where it's coming from and having a more granular insight to that, you can now enable whole new business models like omni-channel and all sorts of other kind of e-com platforms using your brick and mortar store footprint, because you have such a greater identity or understanding of the inventory, where it is at all times, to be able to then act in a far more agile way, which will reduce shrink in your supply chain, reduce waste in your stores, enable consumers to actually have a better experience, which leads to sales uplift with inventory accuracy. And that's just on the supply chain side. And then if you have this information, you can show it to a consumer. Think about how you can use that as a way to build loyalty, convert them to a membership club, or whatever the goal is, to try to activate them to become someone that is a forever customer of your brand. Giving them visibility into that product is actually a great starting point, because we see time and time again that transparency is a key thing that consumers are looking for. Like, what am I feeding my kids? What am I putting on my kids? And there's examples all over the world where you've had counterfeit products that have led to life and death situations, with counterfeit baby formula in Asia,
Oh yeah.
or counterfeit parts going in airplanes leading to plane crashes. So there's like an imperative of life and death that exists as well, but then there's just a greater opportunity to utilize products as a communication channel, as a way to better understand your gaps in your supply chain. And so where like our solutions come in is we're taking all this data, and as I said before, trillions of products, dozens of data points for each product. That's too much to sift through as a brand owner or a factory supplier or whatever. We need to have tools that will actually tell us, what is this data telling us? So it's not just a smoke detector that's smelling fire. We're also helping them put out the fire and figure out how to prevent a fire happening again. And giving all of that sort of insight is what we're doing by taking all of the data that's sitting in the OpMyO platform, all the applications that are pulling data in, all of our integrations, all the different business systems, and creating intelligence on top so that you can operate more sustainably, more effectively, in a more agile way, and find out ways to better connect with your consumer base as well.
There's wow. I mean, the more you explain it, the more there's the ability to just keep going down rabbit holes and and tearing things apart, because there's so much important things. There's so many different important things that are in there. Because let me just start with a very very simple one. So when you're talking about inventory in motion and understanding your inventory and where it's going, all right. So one of the things that like e-commerce interaction with brick and mortar retail, right, is, and trying to marry the two together, is the fact that the inventory that's in that store, they don't know if it's really available or not. I mean, they think they do, but they don't, because is it on the shelf or is it in somebody's physical grocery basket, right? Or store basket going to checkout? Because I mean, and as little as we do, I've run into that issue a couple times where I put something in my virtual basket from like a do-it-yourself big box retailer like a Home Depot or Lowe's, and they think they had it, and I go to get there, and they said, "No, we were out." I mean, that's an issue where I could have gone to another physical store and gotten it, right? I mean, does this solve that type of issues, or is that too mundane for this? This is pretty deep
No,
stuff.
no, no. That's a great example
Very,
of an issue
very
that
deep. This is very
no,
surface, right?
we definitely so if we bring together things like RFID and digital solutions that are able to do this in real time, we can absolutely solve that problem. So, as an example, we just announced recently in this week that our partnership with Amazon for Just Walk Out. So that's essentially combining computer vision throughout the store with RFID on the products to be able to truly like just walk out. So it's a completely frictionless checkout experience. And it's using RFID, so it knows that this product is now in someone's actual shopping cart, or they're even like wearing the jersey walking out of the Seahawks store in the arena kind of thing. And you can literally just walk out wearing the shirt, and it's like, I'm all set, ready to go to the game and take my seat.
Yeah, you just
So
put it on and you've paid for it and everything, right? Yeah.
exactly. So we can. So that exists actually, but it comes down to, I think, really helping to show how you can actually deploy that, because it involves kind of bringing together technology in the store. It involves tagging those products typically at the source, so that throughout the supply chain, you're getting that visibility as well. So you know where they are in which distribution centers or whatever. And I think having that sort of combination of technology is totally possible to really get to that point where it's frictionless, it's accurate. So you bought it online, you can pick it up in the store and it's going to be there. And we even have done programs where we've used that to actually power like local inventory ads. So like we would actually know the inventory in the store, and that way when you're Googling, like I want to go buy, I don't know, a pair of sneakers or I want to go buy something else, it'll actually identify which stores locally through Google are actually have that exact product in their location and that are near you. And they obviously have to participate in the Google Marketplace, but that's another great example where you're seeing kind of the physical product, the physical world reaching the digital world in a way that then ensures that like what you want will be there. And so now it's going to be about which brands, which retailers want to enable that for their consumers to differentiate themselves and create a competitive advantage. Because
And you could see a third party grabbing that as well, right? Almost like ghost kitchens started to come up, right? With DoorDash and that type of stuff. When you started getting these ghost kitchens, you could have these, why isn't Etsy doing this? And everything. Amazon, whatever it happens to be, right? A third party making that stuff happen. That is tremendous stuff. The other thing that you mentioned was trust and transparency, right? And from my what's near and dear to my heart is sustainability and obviously plastics, right? From OPT, but and emissions, that type of stuff. I'm into that because so many, and the reason I got into it is my logistics, but also the fact that, I can't stand the fact when people say, well, it's a scam or whatever. Circularity in your supply chain and reducing emissions and sustainability, et cetera, are basic principles of business operations, right? If you had adhered to them and not bastardized the very simple concepts of making money correctly and efficiencies in your operations, no matter what they are, we'd be green as hell right now, right? Because it's just waste that we're producing, right? And that's what you need to take out. Lean, Six Sigma, TQM, whatever you want to call about. When you put it on steroids, it's circularity, right? And it's sustainability. The issue becomes then the consumer's trust in the transparency, because everybody knows in the United States, I would venture a guess that, statistically, everybody knows that recycling is really wish cycling, right? When you come down to it, everybody thinks they're recycling, but 4%, 4. And we used to think it was 9. Then we studied it closely and said, nah, it's more like 4%. You know what I mean? And even when you start, like we talked about pet bottles, everybody knows that can be recycled, right? They're not sure about this or this tub or that tub or what it happens to be, but a water bottle, who doesn't know that can be recycled? And still only 18% actually get recycled of something everybody knows. It's the easiest thing on the planet to recycle, and still only 18% gets recycled. Does this help with that through that transparency? Like companies can now actually give that report and it be trusted, immutable data that says we're actually making these, instead of saying, hey, it's Corona, we're going to clean up 100 beaches by 2025, right? And then maybe doing 60 or 50 or whatever it happens to be.
The short answer is yes, Michael. That we're focusing on that sort of product level impact and being able to measure that and monitor that, which I find to be far more accurate and far more granular than what has often been historically based on academic research, industrial averages that get translated into rough calculations that, because of how they sort of progress to becoming a calculation, aren't viewed necessarily as being entirely credible, or at least something that's entirely accurate. Maybe they're credible, but not accurate. And I think what we need to see is an adoption of those types of standards as it relates to product level impact, being able to then, with that being adopted as a framework, which it is. There's the GHG protocol. There's all sorts of things that are continuing to push this. It has to be ecosystem and I think business led, quite frankly, to be able to get that adoption. And once that happens, then you have a point where consumers then have sort of like a greater level of visibility of what brands are actually doing or not. And I think that will galvanize more action. At the end of the day, though, there's still a huge investment that has to happen well beyond a connected product cloud or well beyond product level data to enable the infrastructure from the municipal level to the national level is there to be able to actually take all of that product that is recyclable, that should be recycled, What we can do with our solutions is essentially enable the ability to develop new business models with that waste. So it could be creating closed loop systems that are easier to bring product back, whether it's, as an example, we made an investment in the Modern Milkman, which is a company in the UK that essentially does like the milkman, or a drop of groceries once a week, but it's all with returnable containers. And so the idea is that you're not actually like taking a plastic HDP bottle of milk, using it and then throwing it away or recycling it. It's actually a glass container that goes reused and reused and reused. And it's kind of combining like the Amazon fulfillment, like amazingness of the 21st century with the traditional milkman that's showing up with your dairy delivery or whatever every
I
week
think
at
it's
your
amazing.
doorstep.
I think it's amazing. I just did a story on, Cargill and Mitsubishi and Bar Technologies. They're putting what they're now calling wind wings, which are actually sails on ships. This is the new technology, sails. And it's kind of the same thing, because when you were talking about Coca-Cola in returnable bottles or reusable bottles, I thought, okay, so let's just put a milk box on your front porch. Right. I mean, and it's really crazy how you can go back into these different things. That is amazing. So how do you get the collaboration, right? How does this occur? Because you have to have collaboration from so many different entities to track all this stuff. How does that occur? Is it a hardware thing, or is it tapping into data agnostically, or and anonymously, that's already out there? Or can you talk about that? Is that secret sauce type of stuff?
I can talk about it. So I think there's a little bit of an all of the above point here, which is, to get the supply chain fully up and running, you have to be able to bring together hardware, software, labels, data carriers, whatever you want to call them, at every step of the supply chain at scale, be able to make it really easy for them. Because at the end of the day, if you go upstream far enough, you're going to have issues like mobile devices in a grain field or something like that, right? It's going to be a challenge to
Sure.
be able to just get a product tagged at source. So we have to make it super simple for the supply chain to be able to just get products digitized and connected. And then we have to have the connectors to be able to connect all the different systems like ERPs, warehouse management systems, point of sale systems, to be able to have data available to then connect to those unique identities of those products and then tell that whole story. But that's just sort of how we do it in a supply chain. I think there's a whole other thing we've got to do, which is the ecosystem. And in every segment that we serve, whether it's apparel, whether it's EV batteries and automotive, whatever it might be, there's a huge amount of activity happening where solution providers, OEMs and brands, regulators are all coming together to figure out, okay, how do we create a more sustainable way of operating these supply chains? COVID basically pulled back the kimono and revealed like our model of like optimizing for just in time and all this stuff like is so fragile and also not sustainable. If you think about like distance traveled of, mangoes that are grown in Central America, then processed in Southeast Asia and then sold in the US and stuff,
Yeah.
it's like and that goes with any industry. And so I think there's that rethink that's happening, but there's also now people coming together. So we're very active in various groups that are working on things like digital product passports in the automotive industry and the apparel industry. We're very active in sustainability groups like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is like over 200 CEO-led organizations that are part of this group that is working to tackle things like Scope 3. And figuring out what are the ways that we ultimately create systems transformation, because that's what it's going to take to really kind of unlock what needs to get unlocked is systems transformation. And I'm excited to see a lot of this activity. I was actually at Climate Week in New York this week and was able to kind of be a part of some of these discussions. And there's a tremendous amount of, I think, awareness that we need to act now. I think that's a given. I think people have
Yeah.
accepted that premise. I think with it, it's then like, okay, well, how do we start? And how do we make sure we got the right people in the room? Because the underlying solutions exist, the investment needs to be there, and then the commitment to deliver needs to be there. And I think that's really what we're starting to see come together within like the private sector, but then also with a lot of push and pull from the public sector and just the general population too.
So and you mentioned there's this awareness now, or this acceptance that we've got to act now, right? And that's people really believing in climate change and understanding that is actually happening. I also contend that why wouldn't you try and do better for the environment if you could and it makes you money? I mean, it's just a no brainer. Why wouldn't you? Why you don't want to be the Onceler? You want to be the Lorax, right?
Yes.
But right, I mean, and make money doing it. Why wouldn't you? Um, which is really interesting. But the other thing that drives this type of initiative, and we touched on it a bit, is the mandates and regulations and international trade, et cetera, right? And talk about the intricacies there and how they can affect that, because you've got BRICS, which a lot of people just learned about BRICS and thinks it's like it came about because people got pissed off when Russia invaded Ukraine. It's not true. It's been around for almost 15 years, I think, BRICS.
Right.
And now you've got the U.S., et cetera, really kind of pushing towards their own type of BRICS, right? As this weaponization almost of trade, conglomerations, right? The EU was not intended to be a weaponization. It did hurt a lot of the UK, and probably one of the reasons the UK jumped out is, okay, now South Africa joins with BRICS and becomes the S in BRICS because EU kind of left them out in the cold, right? And others were caused there too. How does that impact this type of thing?
There's a few dimensions to that question, obviously, Mike, that I think that play a role. So if you think about it from how the world geopolitical climate has shifted lately, it has created a lot of challenges to being able to deploy systems at scale. Because if you think about some of the work that's happening around data and data protection, whether it's things like GDPR in Europe or the data security acts that are taking place in China, or discussions of the balkanization of data in other large countries around the world, there's going to be more and more of this kind of trend that we see of countries viewing data about their people, about the products that are in their society, as being an actual core piece of intellectual property that they don't want to see leave their country. And so because of that kind of premise, I don't necessarily believe it or disbelieve it, but because of that premise, they're going to get tighter on what happens in their country with their data and stuff like that. That's going to put a challenge on the system, because we still are operating as a global supply chain. Like, we're not just making clothes in China for people in China. We're making clothes in China for every country in the world. We're not making generic pharmaceutical products in India for just Indian consumers and healthcare patients. It's for people all over the world. So there's going to be this acceptance of, how do we localize data to conform to those regulations, but then be able to still operate these global supply chains? I think then that's one area of geopolitical, which I think you're getting at. There's another one, which is on how we're looking at ways that we can actually better harmonize on the way that we deal with identifying products. And so, as an example, we're seeing with Digital Product Passport, which is part of the European Green Deal, that there's a huge push around being able to identify products, have the attributes of the product, stay with that product throughout its life cycle, so that when it is time to get rid of it or do something with the product at its end of life, you can find a clear off-ramp for it that's sustainable and more circular. Now, that's happening in Europe. It's going to impact products that are sold in Europe, wherever the company's HQ is, it doesn't matter. If you're selling the product in Europe, it's going to have a digital product passport. So does that mean that companies are going to only do DPP, digital product passport, for those European destined products? Probably not, because then they're going to have to do whole new workflows and stuff. So we're going to also see a need to globally harmonize some of these requirements in a way that makes it so that we can produce products effectively and productively, and then get them all over the world. But then maybe now they all have this layer of better visibility, a digital product passport, and things like that.
So does the DPP, the format, the digital formats that are within it, have to be living and breathing, right? As more and more acceptance or more demands on this happen, correct? I mean, that's got to be.
Well, just think about how long a product may last. Like, you could have a pair of jeans that last you 20 years. You could have an EV battery that lasts the whole life cycle of the car or longer. And so you have to have a persistent data and physical solution to be able to ultimately support a digital product passport. And on top of that, there's going to be a need to be able to work interoperably at all sizes of companies. So if you look at Europe, 88% of apparel textile companies have fewer than 9 employees. 88% of all the firms. So they don't have the infrastructure or the capital to do what some of these global brands can do in terms of hardware deployments, changing how they produce the trim for their products, all the data solutions that are needed. So we need to have solutions that work for small, for medium, and for massive enterprises, and that can scale. And that's, I think, something that's also unique to Avery Dennison, in that we've got this kind of solutions portfolio that can address things from individual items all the way through to tens of billions of products. And we've produced 90 billion plus data carriers. We have 30 billion products on the Atma.io connected product cloud. So we've already got sort of that critical mass to manage the global data that will come together under DPP, but then can also help the deployments happen wherever at whatever size as well.
I gotcha. And then, yeah, and international regulations, et cetera, start to feed into all of that stuff as well. It's a really, really cool concept, Max. It's really interesting. And it's interesting how you fell into this as well, coming out of political science. But it makes all the sense in the world. Obviously, you're very intelligent, but all of this leads back to commerce and international trade, which is also obviously, as we know, geopolitical action and sentiment absolutely impacts all of that, and societal, sentiment and trust leads into it as well. So, where how is this? Is it being accepted? I mean, obviously it's being accepted, but where's the growth? What's the trajectory forward? Lead us with something that we're going to see coming forward.
Yeah, so you should continue to expect to see Avery Dennison leading at the intersection of physical and digital, and really helping to solve some of the world's most complex problems. So we talked a lot about eliminating waste, supply chain effectiveness, transparency, brand consumer connection. And where we're going is we're just going to continue to serve all of our stakeholders. And we're going to continue to activate brands that are looking to comply with things like Digital Product Passport, but then use that compliance requirement into something far more valuable, and turning traceability into something that truly transforms their supply chains and their systems. So it's a journey that we're really excited to be a part of, that we're working closely with ecosystems, small companies, large companies, every segment, to really try to make happen. And I'm confident that that vision of every item having a unique digital identity is going to be something that happens a lot sooner than we all think. Because at the end of the day, Michael, like the pace of change will never be as slow again as it is right now. And because of that, like we're going to see just a tremendous amount of new things come together, leveraging new technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence and generative AI, to all sorts of things that will truly transform our society. And it's our job as leaders, as companies providing solutions, to help steer that in the right direction and help everyone get there faster and building it in a scalable and sustainable way. So I'm really excited and hopeful for the future. It's going to be a lot of work, but as we were saying before we started the recording, right? Like, these types of ventures and these types of initiatives, like the highs are totally worth the lows. And ultimately,
Yeah.
the goal we're trying to achieve is making the world a better place. And it's easy to get up all day, every day, thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, listen, I'm not even going to ask another question. Except I'm going to ask one last question before we say goodbye, because that was tremendous. I loved what you just said there, and that is, where do people go to learn more about what you're doing there, my friend?
Absolutely. So thanks. So you can obviously learn more about Avery Dennison overall at averydennison.com. You can learn more about Atma.io at atma. Only time I'll say it, atma.io.
Oh, you
And
said
then
it
obviously
twice,
look.
though.
Okay. Well, and also you can look me up on LinkedIn. So Max Winograd, find me on LinkedIn. Just ping me. I'm happy to talk. Love meeting with entrepreneurs, innovators, anyone that's looking to continue to drive things forward as we try to make a more sustainable future. So look forward to it. And again, Michael, thank you so much for having me on today. I really do appreciate it.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for being on. We're gonna have to dig into this again some other time,
Let's do it.
some more, because I mean, man, my audience is into supply chain big time, and this is a massive, massive, massive item: is data, reliable, transparency, and taking action. Actionable, real time data is incredibly important and very, very valuable. And I thank you for your efforts, my friend. Peace and love, my friend.
All right. Take care. Thank you. Cheers.
Hey.